Good evening, everyone. I'm Corena Pereira. It's my honor to welcome all of you present here. Thank you for being a part of the third edition of Orange City Literature Festival. Here's a question that's probably never crossed your mind. That is, what's the best way to read a book? Of course, the logic goes that if you can read words and understand meanings behind them, you can easily digest a book from start to finish. But your reading technique can largely influence your brain's performance and how you approach certain things in life. So here we welcome Ms. Krupa Ge coming up with the astonishing benefits and details of reading as a writer, even if you don't plan on becoming a one. Our speaker of this seminar, Ms. Krupa Ge, is a Madras-based writer. She has written a novel, What We Know About Her, Context 2021, as well as a narrative non-fiction book, Rivers Remember, Context 2019. Over the last 13 years, her reportage and cultural writings have appeared in Indian and international publications. Her debut, We Know About Her, was named to the longlist for the JCB Prize for Literature 2021. Krupa received a Ladli Award in 2017 for her column on women in film, misrepresentation in the New Indian Express. She is currently dabbling with us with her screenwriting.
Can I start now? Yeah. Thank you so much. I thought I'll start this session by doing a small reading that will sort of lead into what it is that I want to say. There will always be a big positive to train travel. Higginbotham's at the Chennai Central, my station sanctuary. Buying a book from the store before getting on a train was among the few rituals I performed with devotion. I picked up my first Sweet Valley University as a giggly, nervous teenager on a class trip to Coor. Archies on summer vacations, and there were those tinkle digests with Supandi and Chamataka. I devoured countless Gokulams on trains lying on my mother's lap. The one shelf for fiction, one for non-fiction, and 10 for self-help kind of bookstores at airports would never match up. Now, I want to start with this particular reading because this is actually in the very first chapter of my novel, What We Know About Her. And when I wrote these lines, I really was reaching out into the past to my own childhood, of the characters and books that allowed me to escape, of the gentle strolls to the little library down the road from home. It was called Raviraj Lending Library, where my brother was a member. And he would bring home whatever caught his fancy. My own memories of the Higginbotham's bookstore that I've written about in this passage that I just read for you are inextricably linked to those long, maddeningly hot summer months growing up. A pit stop, especially at the railway station branch, to pick up Tinkle, Archies, Champak, and Gokulam before rushing to the berth to lie down with a book under the whirring fan, was a ritual as well as a treat. When my first book came out in 2019, it was a great thrill rushing to the store to see it out front on the new arrivals table, on the checkered black and white original old flooring. Higginbotham's, for the uninitiated, is India's oldest bookstore, one of the oldest and largest bookshops in operation in the world, an underrated gem that deserves a bit more celebrity than has been accorded by the Indian literary establishment. I didn't grow up with a big collection of books at home, but reading was a constant in my life, as was listening, which I think is an utterly underrated form of absorption. In our traditions, especially, and more so As women, we have to rely on our rich oral traditions for nuances in stories, especially for family lore about women, which is a primary concern of my novel. Growing up, my brother and I were privy to the many, many stories of my parents of living in a small Mofussil town in homes with 15 other cousins around them, of aunts and uncles, and widowed women sharing the roof. There would always be this uh, sparkle in their eye, almost a whiff of nostalgia. And there was never any resentment. They were always happy. If there was resentment, it was only in the present. Somehow, time had turned even the most adverse of their stories into something wonderful. And it is this sense of nostalgia about seemingly dark things, this sense of satisfaction in telling and retelling the same stories, honing them each time and sharpening them to perfection that I think made me want to tell stories as well. That's what I think made me want to write. I also recently heard something very interesting. Someone said that your first novel is almost always fan fiction. And I think there's definitely some truth to this. A lot of what you write, especially in your first fiction, comes from what you read, and which is why I sort of decided that today I should talk to you about reading and how it impacts my writing. My upbringing in Madras in the late 1980s, in the late 1980s and 90s, as it did many children of my generation and the ones before me, led me to picnics in beautiful countryscapes that dotted Enid Blyton's books. Famous Five and Secret Seven, with a generous serving of scones, marmalade, pears, fresh cream, crumpets, and whatnot. And like any self respecting Enid Blyton reading child, I nurtured a not so secret yearning to eat scones at tea one day. When I finally did, surprisingly much later in life, at a charming cafe in Madras, I was utterly disappointed. Perhaps it was the weight of all that expectation. Perhaps I wasn't a scone person. I never could figure out which. But then I thought about why is it that I wanted to eat a scone? And just yesterday, I was reading a review of my book on Instagram. Somebody had read my book and they posted a review of it. And it said that there's a lot of food in this book. One of the reasons I think that I enjoy writing about fictional characters eating is because I enjoy reading about them eating. And so those scones disappointed me. I kept looking for food in my books as I was reading, growing up. And as I grew up, my taste in books took a turn from the English writing to someplace closer to home and to cultures similar to ours. I not only enjoyed the taste of the local in my mouth as I savored the words that leapt out of these pages, but also the dishes they were talking about. That's when it hit me, uh, one of those days when I was thinking about food and writing, as always. Food, just like our books, is very political, and perhaps that is why we vacillate from wanting to ban books to wanting to ban foods once every few months here. When I read Rohinton Mysteries, A Fine Balance, which is set in the turbulent days of the emergency in the 1970s, I had this urge to run out to some shop nearby to eat masala vada. The vada that Rohinton Mystery talks about is the vada with a W, and what you would get if you ran out of your home in Madras is a vada with a V. In the book, they make masala vada and chutney. Mystery's description of the entire process, the frenzy with which the characters in the book whip up the dish, working together as a unit, going out to buy ingredients, boiling dal, grinding kopra and kothmir mirchi, slicing onions and mint leaves. It's an absolute delight. Much later, I tried making masala vada with a V with my husband, and mystery was right. Nothing can whip up a frenzy in your house the way the making of vadas can, but everything, is dependent on whether it's going to come out the way you imagined it, particularly on a rainy day. evening with masala chai or a strong cup of coffee for company, I think the experience that Miss Ray has written about can come alive for you as well. The sweetness of the fennel seeds, with the crispy, crunchy, earthy taste of fried curry leaves. If anybody heard me speaking now, they'd probably think I'm talking about food as a writer. But I wanted to share these aspects of reading about food as a writer because reading has been ascribed for reasons of caste and for reasons of uh, hierarchy in our society. It has been ascribed a very uh, different sort of a status, and I want to strip that down to what reading can really be. It can really be something pleasurable. It can lead you to discovering who you are as a person, and what it is that you really enjoy, and that can sort of also lead to what is it that you want to say as a writer. For instance, when I read Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, the Nigerian writer's Purple Hibiscus, I wanted very badly to eat jollof rice. And to my surprise, when I got down to making it, I realized how much like our takali sadam, which is tomato rice, it was. And the deep fried plantains that went with it. Have you met Kerala's fried Nendrambaram? Which is the same thing, really. And then there's the really tasty parampuri or etakappam, banana fritters. We South Indians also love our stir-fried, unripe plantains, with some popped mustard seeds, curry leaves, and some masala, of course. Every now and then at home, I make my own fusion Nigerian South Indian food because that is, these are all, even though I've never been to Nigeria, these are all the influences that reading leaves me with. Copious amounts of coffee drunk out of tumblers made of stainless steel made appearances in R.K. Narayan's short stories. And when I was a tween, I related to the many coffees drunk through the day and the tumblers in our homes. Because what Narayan was writing about was basically what I had seen in my own home, which is you drink coffee out of a filter coffee, you drink filter coffee out of a tumbler, right? And later, as a student of sociology, I would understand the implications of social status and caste status and how that impacts what you drink and how you drink it. You see, the working class in my city, Chennai, drinks tea, while the upper caste, drink filter coffee out of devices called tumblers, and these tumblers were made especially to avoid ritual pollution. Professor A.R. Venkatachalapathi's book, In Those Days There Was No Coffee, is a beautiful nonfiction collection, and it's a sociological study of class, caste, beverages, and cinema about my part of the world. And that helped me understand how untouchability and ritual pollution evolved with time. It would later make me wonder if I should subvert caste symbols and use the tumbler and the davara, which was sort of like the saucer for the cup, which was the tumbler, while serving coffee to everyone in my home, or if I should abandon those markers of caste and opt for mugs. Since we're talking about short stories and caste now, I must mention a Tamil favorite. In this short story collection called Posal by writer Kavita Sornavalli, Pachai Pambakari, Green Snake Woman, I think when you translate it, it comes to. It stayed with me for its balance of pride, food, and the effect of not so subtle everyday violence of caste on young minds in Tamil Nadu. I stumbled upon this collection online after reading a review. In this story, Kavita's protagonist writes a love letter of sorts to a grandmother whose food, it seems, can never go wrong. Not even bitter gourd is bitter when her grandmother lays her magical hands on the vegetable. Pots filled with oyster, finely chopped cabbage, black coffee sweetened with jaggery. Kavita's story is a tale of beauty, and it's told with so much love. A recent favorite food moment of mine came in Vivek Shanbag's wonderful novella Gachar Gochar, translated from the Kannada by Srinath Perur. The turmoil of a woman coming to the doors of a newly rich home, looking for a man with a dal she has made for him, defiant at first and defeated later. The smell of masala from the dal that hangs in the air even after she leaves. All of this hints at the huge power play at hand. And Gachar Gochar handles the politics of food and caste just the way it handles all the other things in this story, by not dwelling on it for too long. A lot of what I've spoken about here now has influenced the way I write about food, people, and the politics of it all as well. So now I'd like to come to the fundamental question at hand for me today. Is it any different when we read as writers than it is when we read as readers? This is a question I thought I'd spend some time thinking aloud about with you. And I may not have any correct answers, fortunately or unfortunately. And I may just change my mind about this tomorrow. But today, here, this is what I'm here to ask and tell myself. One of the great joys of writing, I think personally for me, is responding to something I have read. It's almost as if I'm having a conversation with another piece of art at many points as I'm writing. And since reading is really the most important aspect of writing, over the years I've become less picky about what I read. Although the patience I have for certain kinds of writing, I do not have for others. And what I read mostly informs what I end up writing. So what I read is not just as anybody else may call it a fertilizer or a catalyst, but it is the very earth on which the ideas of who I want to be as a writer and what I want to write about and how I can do it grow. There isn't a stark difference, I would say, in reading, say, as a reader and reading as a writer. While you're reading, when you sit down to write, that's where it really shows up. And I thought I'll demonstrate this with my own work. I'll tell you about the writers, not all of them, but a few of them whose work has moved me to act, moved me into action, and whose writing has forced me to rethink the ideas of what can make for literature and what cannot, and what I can write about in turn. One of the biggest ways in which I processed the trauma of losing everything in my parents' home to a flood was by writing about it in my first book, Rivers Remember. It's a loss that, in a way, I'm still grappling with. For instance, just a few days ago, I found out that all my childhood school photos, the yearly photo of the entire class that I had saved and left in my parents' home, are now missing and were possibly lost to the floods. This is only the latest in the things we have discovered that we lost to the floods in 2015. And I've lost count of the things we have lost to the floods. But, however, compared to what others lost in this flood, it's very, very minor. It's simply material because many people lost loved ones. And initially, there was this internal dichotomy: how do I frame this loss, my loss? So, in order to make sense of this, while being respectful of the loss of other people, being mindful of my privilege and using it to tell the story of others who had lost far worse things than I had lost, I turned to writing. I turned to journalism. I used my pain to understand the pain of those who were affected in manners graver and worser than me. And the inspiration to do this came entirely from my obsession at that time with reading anything Murakami had written. Around the time of the floods, I read Haruki Murakami's Underground. It is a complex and compelling non fictional account of the sarin gas attack in the Tokyo subway. Murakami was, in fact, in turn inspired to write his book Underground after reading a letter in a magazine in which the wife of a victim of the gas attack asks, how on earth did this happen to us? In the aftermath of the flood, which was entirely man made, I could relate to this question a lot. Reading Murakami's Underground gave me the permission that I was looking for. I had thought of myself as a writer, but I had limited my own idea of what it means to being a writer. Whereas Underground helped me see how we can write about something truthfully and with empathy, even when we cannot make sense of it in a philosophical sort of way. And this is how reading has really sort of come to my aid. It both allowed me to empathize with the victims in Murakami's own work, as well as push me to understand my own loss and that of several others in the floods of 2015. In the midst of the stringent lockdown last year, I received a phone call. It was feedback on my novel that's out this year, What We Know About Her. My editor had given me some notes on what they thought that I should do with my book. And trying to write or rewrite while the world was being undone felt like denial, like cowardice. How can you be writing a novel when what the world is going through out there is so horrible? It's like going to war with ants in your kitchen when a mob is burning down your neighborhood. I couldn't write and I couldn't think, and so I read. This time I turned to Meena Kandasami's novella Exquisite Cadavers, and I finished the book in half a day. It's a very small novella. Exquisite Cadavers is an inventive book that compresses what feels like years into the margins of a book, while unfurling a story at the heart of which is the question, what's the worst that can happen? So in this book, every page is divided into two halves, and in the margins, Meena's writing about her own thoughts, and in the center of the book, an actual fictional story that she is working on is playing out. Meena's playful explosion of routine and form in this book, until you can no longer separate the story from the form itself, is not new. She is among this generation's most original authorial voices, especially in fiction. I found Exquisite Cadavers appealing, urgent, not only for the contents of what was in the margins of the book, the things that are plaguing India now, religious fundamentalism, violent subjugation of dissent, but also for the concerns of the writer who's coming to terms with what she's writing, removed from the violence that is threatening to undo India. The novella came to me just as Murakami's work did, when I was feeling helpless about the unimaginable torments others around me were grappling with while trying to work. This question of working when the world is burning, I realized must have been something artists have grappled with over centuries. This in turn led me to write something, and that sort of became a letter that I considered very dear to me, and something that I think is very uh, important part of this novel. It's a section in which the protagonist of my book writes a letter in the 1940s to her cousin. This is what she says. This is what I wrote, inspired by the events of what I just described to you. Women have woven saris, written poems of love and separation as wars raged between kingdoms. Dancers have swayed in love for the divine. It's our job to keep on living and to leave a record of what we saw in our time on this earth. If war is always around us, hate is forever holding us. It is we, those in the pursuit of life's fleeting joys, that bear witness to the truth that art too is here, as is love. If hate and death are permanent, so are love and life. At least for some of us, some of the time. This is something that I wanted to write about at that time, and I think it was mainly driven by what was happening with the world last year and what I had read. And this is what I was talking about when I said that what you read can end up making a profound impact on what you write later. Now, as I wrap this talk up, having told you about what I've read in the past, I thought I should tell you about what my reading is like now and where it is now. I now find myself increasingly drawn to translated literature these days because I primarily read in English. I think this may be because I find it hard to reconcile the fact that I don't speak only English. On any given day, I speak at least four different languages: Tamil, Telugu, Hindi, and English. And as in India, many of us are at least speaking two languages often. And so to just read in English feels a little bit like I'm cheating my own self, or denying my own self some more pleasure. I also think that the fundamental barrier of a character or a narrator's voice that can sometimes be alienating or often put one off of books written originally in English in South Asia is already crossed in translated literature. Perhaps this is why I'm drawn more to translations as well as books in English that acknowledge the fact that most of us are operating in a world of multiple languages. The Italian writer Domenico Starnoni, whose works have been translated to English by Jhumpa Lahiri, is at the top of my reading pile right now. I've read both Trick and Ties, both written by Domenico and translated by Jhumpa, and cannot wait to dig into his new book, Trust, which has also been translated by Lahiri. Now, it's been a great pleasure spending this time talking about something that gives me great joy, reading, and how that sort of can help you along the way answer some of life's questions and maybe even write what it is that you're thinking about. Thank you, Orange City Literature Festival, for the time and the space to talk about something so dear to me.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you for a wonderful session, for sharing your knowledge and experience, ma'am. It was really a wonderful session, ma'am.
Thank you.
And thank you for being a part of a third edition of Orange City Literature Festival.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Bye.
Welcome to Raisoni Group, a vision beyond.